Well, hello, that's me again. Today is January 13th. It is Friday the 13th. So let's start dealing with some horrors of operational planning and operational and tactical calculations because it needs to be explained what is going on at the front of the special military operation and basically help you to navigate this basically huge ocean of bullshit which is basically created by the Western media who do not know anything but PR. And some people asked me a few days ago in the discussion board about what about this Lanchester, the whole thing about planning of operations and calculating things in English. Of course they are in English, and of course because their basic approach to the judging and assessing the war is obviously universal. It is used in Russia, it is used in France, it is used in the United States on the operational level officers. That means on the level of the staffs, it means on the levels of the war colleges. And yeah, this is how the war is fought, not whatever they try to basically portray in like today. You can easily find it in Yahoo News and whatever. It's in the open New York Times that, oh, finally Ukraine gets some tanks. Sure, let Ukraine get some tanks, Leopard 2 or whatever, the German monster rumbling piece of metal, which actually performed extremely badly in Syria against the even older Soviet actually anti-tank guided missiles. But yeah, 14 tanks. They talk about their company, basically one company of tanks. No, they're not going to change anything. I mean, they will require a little bit more time to, basically annihilate them. But yeah, even if they would send, I don't know, brigade or division, basically size number of tanks, which it varies depending on the types of the division. In France, it's, I believe, 150 tanks. In the United States, it can go as high as 300 tanks in tank division, even more. So it won't make any difference in terms of strategic goals. And I will try to explain to you why this is all about not PR, but obviously with the famous abbreviation, so to speak, GIGO, which is garbage in, garbage out. You have to remember that garbage in, garbage out is, people say, is from the software engineering world, that it is the situation when the algorithm is good, but the information which is being fed into this algorithm and is so bad that you basically feed in garbage and you get garbage on the outside as the result. The example of this is, of course, the climate pseudoscience, basically, which still cannot find its own ass in the brightly lit room, and so long ago became a basically a religion which has very little to do with actual science and especially data sets. And data sets and their veracity is what really matters. Even when you have the best algorithms, even if you have the best supercomputers, if you feed them trash, basically, you're going to get trash on the outside, no matter how well your model is. But in war, of course, and I am on the records again, and on the record, and again, read my books. I write about the fact that basically American military, which also uses a scientific method of the operational planning and tactical approach to war, and let alone trying to at least present or develop some kind of the strategy, which it never follows, though. It never had really proper, normal, and verifiable and solid data sets when it comes to Russia and Soviet Union. Just to give you an example, you may find very many fanboys, even with degrees in history and specialists in military history, quote unquote, who write about, for example, Luftwaffe. What many people do not understand, for example, why Luftwaffe had such horrendous scores, be them on the Western Front or on the Eastern Front. They don't understand that Luftwaffe, unlike it was in the Red Air Force, for example, you were given credit even if 10 people, 10 Messerschmitt, for example, 109s, shot down 1 or 2 Red Air Force planes. Each of the pilots in this group, obviously, if we talk about 10 pilots, not that they were bad pilots, some excellent aces fought on the Eastern Front in 1941-42, but all of them have been credited with the victory. So they shot down one plane, 10 people get the credit for it. This is the classic garbage in, garbage out. So then what you get your incredibly important war correlates and data sets, and you begin to look at it and says, something doesn't add up. And the same goes, for example, to tank engagement on the Eastern Front. But we have to understand that basically American military was profoundly, and this is not me, this is Mr. Glantz and Jonathan House speaking, were profoundly affected by the German view of the war. As the result, American military was using all kinds of garbage, basically, which was presented by Wehrmacht, very often for purely emotional reasons, and they were feeding this thing about that Russians basically were throwing, their bodies and tanks at this, unstoppable Wehrmacht machine and the Axis machine on the Eastern Front, but then somehow, by some miracle, Russians ended up in taking Berlin and destroying German National Socialism. So this is garbage in, garbage out. But let's take a look at the algorithms which define everything what is happening right now, and to give you example of why, for example, American military today, with the exception of few people and of course the relatively narrow strata of the operational level officers in Pentagon and planning departments, they do know pretty much the real story because they're educated and they have enough experience to understand this. But why, for the most part, what they operate today is a complete informational trash. Just to give you example, in relation to the special military operation, and yesterday the establishment newspaper, very famous newspaper, I do not like Izvestia, but yay, they are one of those big Russian newspapers which have been around for a long time. And on yesterday, in the one of the heads of the Donetsk Public in the People's Republic, which is now basically the Russian Oblast, he stated when speaking in the to the Russian TV, the TV channel of the Russia One, Mr. Gagin, he stated, and he is also political expert and he is advisor of the video of, which is the executive person of the Donetsk Republic. Jan Gagin stated that we obliterated, annihilated in the Solidar alone approximately 5 brigades. And this is Solidar alone. When people say that it's a small city, yeah, it used to be 19,000, then by 2021 it became 10,000, but the obviously operational significance of this town is much larger than it might seem. But what is 5 brigades of armed forces of Ukraine? Roughly speaking, and these are the numbers which are being confirmed now also by Russian Defense Ministry and by people of Wagner group, we're looking at 20 to 25,000 actually killed alone. So, and how many so the count will continue for a while. We're looking at the catastrophic losses, and then now we have the Bakhmut and Ukraine trying desperately throw whatever they got into Bakhmut, but it doesn't matter. I mean, again, they are moving all kinds of reserves, but hey, okay, let them move it. I mean, the more, kind of cannon fodder, more people will die. And I want to start for you to basically explaining all this, that while obviously United States have been influenced dramatically by the German view of war and developed it from there, we need to understand when people say, oh, that's slow, Russians do it this and that, not right. Russians do it deliberately. They do it in accordance to plan, and we obviously do not know all political circumstances surrounding the whole situation. But look at this. If you look attentively at even famous Leavenworth papers, as For example, the group which Colonel Glantz at that time of the also Slavic military studies and especially World War II on the Eastern Front basically were writing about. Here is one of such papers which you can find really interesting, fascinating really. Research survey number 5 by the U.S. Army Command and College General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And it is talking about standing fast German defensive doctrine on the Russian front during World War II, pre-war to March 1943. And Major Timothy Ray, who wrote this paper, he's talking about, obviously, elastic defense of Germans, which they were using, which actually has its genesis in the World War I. And this is what elastic defense looks like. And the idea of the elastic defense, of course, was several zones, and you can see both the terrain, basically map, and you can see also how schematically it looks like, which is, of course, a bunch of the trenches, all interconnected, which allow you to basically bog down the enemy, which whatever they try to attack from the front, and that's how it looks like. You lose, or for example, or arrest in the outpost zone. If you're not, you go back to battle zone, main battle zone. Then you try to arrest the enemy there. Then and rearward zone. Then you begin to fight any way you have. But your idea. Of course, is to arrest advancement of the enemy in the battle zone. And it's so after that, you can always withdraw and let artillery, for example, do the job. So that's the whole idea. It didn't change much. And when you talk about what Ukraine was doing from 2014 through recently, including Solidar and Bakhmut, this is what their whole idea of defense and of Ukrainian armed forces is. It's definitely influenced by the ideas of the Pentagon and all those guys from United Kingdom, from General Staff, and this is how they were influenced. They were dramatically influenced by the German and Wehrmacht ideas, and the idea was, of course, to create such basically elastic defense that make Russians, basically bogged down. Obviously, it is turned out to be complete bullshit, because Russians are not idiots. They know about Germans and how they fought way more than American or UK military professionals know. And so they knew it was coming, so that is why there was no all those jumps up front, and rushing those defenses. It's not like that, especially when you consider the fact that this is the war of the 21st century, and you have absolutely new set of the means of the fire impact, be that from the standoff weapons to massive firepower of MLRS, for example, and tanks, and that's what you have. You basically operate on the patience, and armed forces of Ukraine, whatever is left from them, are patience. But when you look at the commonality of the whole thing about the operational approach to operation, so to speak, including, of course, you need to know tactics, you need to have the tactical experience behind yourself, you begin to see that, they are pretty common, and they all are always come down to the single simplest problem. It's the problem of the required force. You can ask anybody who ever commanded anything above company, let alone battalion, let alone brigade, and not speaking about their army group, they will tell you immediately the main issue which you solve, actually there are two of them, but they are totally interconnected, is the issue of the correlation of forces and required force. Once you did this analysis, and today this analysis is done basically not only on modeling with the computers, it's obviously has to be done on the real, verifiable, and valid data sets. Obviously, American military has issues with that. And those issues are well documented, and it's not that the United States doesn't have supercomputers or computers, simply. The United States has all of that. It has software which does this thing, which allows it both model and even, wargaming. Russians also have it, so you just plug in the data and you begin to calculate. But that's the whole point. What is the data set? What is this data which you stick or, plug into this model that you get in the end, this garbage in and garbage out. Let me explain. Obviously, Americans are also very much keen on their operational approaches, and if you look through the whole bunch of the field manuals, you can immediately see that, yeah, there is a kind of general stuffish approach to it. But the problem, of course, is America never fought the war of the scale which is happening right now. There's no generation of officers who ever faced anything like this. Same goes actually for Vietnam War, and I'm not talking about beating the crap out of the third-rate Iraqi army. So how do you approach it? Well, let's take a look at how people in the Combat Study Institute and do it. We can go to basically School of Advanced Military Studies, United States Army Command and General Staff College. You already know this college. It's called Combat Power Analysis is Combat Power Density. It is a monograph by Major James Zanella of the United States Army, but it's basically the monograph which covers pretty much things which are very common for Russians and Americans, French, British, and others. And if you remember, in one of my videos, I also demonstrated to you basically how those basic tasks look like. I gave you the basic calculations, for example, on the how to calculate required force, especially when you know the correlation of forces. For example, in this particular case, we were talking about 3M22 zircon, which of course based around the probability of the intercept, which is still very high. I was very general saying that it's 0.2 for each standard missile. And you saw yourself how this problem was designed, you know, and solved for the, for example, kill probability of 0.9. You needed about, well, 10 and a half. Well, let's round it to 11 missiles, which still won't really reflect the real situation with trying to repulse the zircon attack, let alone if it's not one, but many zircons which flying into your group or carrier battle group. So, and you remember this solution was that, for example, if you would go to basically the probability of the intercept somewhere around 0.1, which was more realistic, you would need about 21 missiles, which of course is physical impossibility for the Arleigh class Aegis equipped and standard missiles equipped destroyers who guard carrier battle group. So, and then of course you can also recall this. This is, I also remind you, I also discussed this problem with you. It was the number of the tanks you will require to basically intercept or stop from the first shot their, let's say, MLRS, enemy's MLRS, which was ready to basically deploy and start shooting enemy troops. And for the desired kill probability, when you knew the correlation of forces and you knew your own verifiable data set on the probabilities of the killing anything, any target by every single tank in your group, you could solve this problem with the desired probability of 0.97, and you would need about 5 tanks. So these are classic problems, classic operational and tactical calculations, which are done by the staff of the tactical level units, be that sometimes brigade, or I mean battalion and brigade, and of course operational tactical units, which we're talking about divisions. But of course those things are also developed by people, as I already showed you. It's tactical operational level officers. They write monographs, they write their thesis, and they are talking about this. This is in continuation of this correlation of forces and required force monograph, as you can see yourself. And here's the introduction. It's a 2012 paper, by the way. Historically, the United States military has had difficulty articulating and justifying force requirements to civilian decision makers. Most recently, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq reinvigorated the debate over the proper identification of force requirements. The military's inability to define force requirements became a conspicuous issue in late 2009 when Obama administration rejected the Army statements of force requirements for securing Afghanistan after receiving the initial assessment of 40,000 additional soldiers. The administration spent 3 months conducting its own assessment, and as a result chose to send only 30,000 additional soldiers. The doctrinal planning tools had again provided force estimates that proved unpersuasive. And here's the issue. I kind of feel for the American military, because obviously it's very difficult to calculate anything within their coin, which is of course counterinsurgency. But look at this. Here is the issue which this paper basically underscores. The U.S. Army oldest doctrinal method for calculating combat power is the correlation of forces model, COFM. That model is a planning tool used by planners to help commanders determine if they have enough assets to close with and defeat the enemy with direct and indirect fires. So it's basically, this is the subject which, of course, America's Command and General Staff College Department of Tactics and Operations deals with. But if you look attentively how it is approached by the American side, and obviously you have a different kind of models which fluctuate, so to speak, between one set of data to another, you can see yourself that basically they built this thing about very correct approach in sense of the effectiveness index. The Center for Army Analysis developed the Weapon Effectiveness Index, weighted unit value model in the early 1970s to provide a gross static measure of a force combat potential to inform defense acquisition and force structure decision. Unlike pure Lanchester equations that could only compare like, which is homogeneous systems, to like systems, the Weapon Effectiveness Index weighted unit value model allowed comparison between heterogeneous units indexed to a commonly understood baseline. It's correct approach. You want to compare sometimes apples and oranges, so to speak. This system enabled comparison between Soviet bloc and NATO units. The ability to compare units of various sizes fielded with assorted weapon systems provided a great advantage over static Lanchester equations or simple numerical comparisons between friendly and threat weapon systems. The model was simple. Essentially, modelers classified every conventional weapon based on functional parameters. The modelers then assessed the individual weapons based on certain technical characteristics shared by the family of weapons. The technical assessment allowed subject matter experts to rank the weapons within categories and thus develop a weapons effectiveness index. The weapon effectiveness index is the foundation for the weighted unit value and armor division equivalent models. And here we approach this very important thing. This is where the garbage in, garbage out happens, because United States at some point of time started to believe in the effectiveness of its own weapons, which of course were used at what? At coin, against those guys in sandals and turbans, with AK-74 or AK-47 even. And maximum they were used was RPGs or improvised explosive devices. But reality is that mathematics and model was basically correct. For example, here's effectiveness formula. Pardon me. Weapon effectiveness index formula is this, where C with the subscribe are weighting coefficients of each index. F is the firepower index, M is the mobility index, S is the survivability index. These are all good data. These are all good model inputs. The problem, of course, again, when you plug into this index and you calculate this index, the garbage, instead of verifiable data sets based on the real war, based on the real clash with the comparable enemies, you get obviously what you got today, because they thought that Ukrainians will be able to win this whole thing. You have to be absolutely, just absolutely high on very heavy drugs to admit, to even assume that. But that's what evidently they thought in Pentagon. And if somebody were pushing Ukraine to start basically and provoke Russia for their retaliation, thinking that and telling Ukrainians that you can win it, normal professionals, I'm pretty sure they were, pretty much sure what is going to happen. Another matter that they didn't expect Russia to approach it the way she did it this way. And so when you look at this, and when you look at those indexes, you can always calculate situation like this, which is, of course, the Lanchester equations are still applicable and can be described work engagements on the aggregated level. As you can see yourself, here's the basic tank engagement, and this is all about correlation of force or ratios, which you need to consider both on tactical and operational level when you have these combat power ratios. For example, this is the historic force ratios which Americans prefer, so to speak, and which are very popular in the popular or military porn environment and community. And for example, you can say like relation between friendly and enemy forces on the attack. You see they're marked in the highlighted in yellow and underlined with red. Friendly want to have 3/1 advantage over prepared or fortified, but you have to understand that special military operation completely overturned all those ratios. And for people who understand what is going on since the February 24 last year and how Russians approach, those ratios almost become irrelevant because they're completely different game on the effectiveness of weapons, and of course the personnel begins. Then if you ask me, in this case, what is the weighted averages, what are those weighted indexes, what weighted is in general, let me show you something which I explained to my readers I believe 7 years ago. For example, look at this. Let's imagine that we consider some army which is fighting, and we want to understand what will be, well, mathematical expectations if you wish, but let's say what is the index. Now let's give the index of the morale of the army, for example, values. Let's say that basically unscaled values, just numbers. Low morale is 3, average morale is 5, and high morale is 7. Calculating the average of these three values, which is 5, makes absolutely no sense. But let's say this. Your unit or army fought for 10 battles. And look at this. And we can say that out of 10 battles in this campaign, in 2 of these battles, the army or the unit performed poorly and exhibited a low morale. That is 3. So we can calculate now the probability based on this campaign of low morale. What is the probability of this? Very simple. If you fought, for example, 10 battles and 2 of them were with a low morale, you divide 2 by 10, you have 1/5 or 0.2. And that means then you go with the other types of the battles which you fight, and then suddenly in 4 of the 10 battles you have the medium morale, which is 0.4, and then you perform 4 out of 10 battles with a very high morale, which still gives you 2/5 and 0.4. So what do we have then? What is the mathematical expectation of weighted average, basically, of the morale of this unit? Very simple. How many battles did we fight with the low morale? So we have 3 and multiply by 0.2. So how many battles, or basically weighted average, we fought for the average morale? 5 and multiplied by 0.4. And then of course we have I don't know why I'm having here 7. I kind of screwed up, I believe. So, oh no, I correct. Yeah, the high morale is 7. It also 0.4. So we multiply that and we get 0.6 plus 2.0 plus 2.8, and then we, after we calculated that, we understand that our morale became actually 5.4. This is our average morale, or mathematical expectations of the morale of our unit, which we can calculate, and that's what we expect. That's the weighted values. You can apply very much same thing for all kinds of the weapons, all kinds of the models, and it could be for the fire impact, it would be related to the number of shells required to blow the freaking concrete reinforced position or what have you. And then, of course, it becomes a very complex statistical game, and you will need a lot of computers, a lot of software, and a lot of computer power. But that's what staffs do. That's what they build. And when you begin to look at the special military operation for any professional, whoever was trained in this, and believe me, cadre officers who graduate military academies, at least in Russia, they all trained by the time they are finished with military academies courses, and then of course they go into war colleges, let alone, well, general staff academies are really top order, very few people get in there. But this is what, for example, how people in operational level think. That's how they conduct operational calculations, and that is why when you talk about, and now with the Solidar, which is PR, it's operational success, it's great, but Russia was killing and slaughtering the armed forces of Ukraine in industrial amounts since the first day. It's just that basically Western media and the Russian media, bunch of those idiots and those military correspondents, they never taught that. They have never been taught that. They never trained them in the real art of war and operations. And that's why they were spreading this, oh my God, look at this tank, exploded. Or then Russians withdrew from 2,000 square kilometers of the empty field. They should have stayed there and died there for defending what? The field of the corn? So and that's when you begin to explain this to people, and that Ukraine never had a chance. And even now it doesn't have a chance, especially now when you obviously will have this talk of the bunch of the morons who think that putting boots of U.S. Army there will change anything. Anything United States Army can put in eastern Ukraine or former Ukraine near Russia will be annihilated, because Russia, as I already told you, didn't use 85% of its military potential, and basically Russians calculated very well this required force. The reason they calculated it really well, bar some tactical level, not operational level mistakes, is because, yeah, they use the same apparatus, but they plug in the actual data. They plug in actual intelligence, not PR bullshit which is being operated as the reality in US media and Western media, and especially among very many American generals who performed an outstanding service in exposing incompetence and sore loserism on the strategic level. But then again, you wanted to see the first modern war of the 21st century? Here it is. And when I say it will be studied in the all military academies in the world, I mean it. Another matter that, of course, as usual, in the West, they will use the garbage in as the data set. And they will say, oh, we're so good, while losing all their wars. And this is what I wanted to tell you, to give you basically the review of the instrumentarium, some very few tools which are used to calculate what is being calculated and what is being basically planned in the serious staff operational level work. You see, I use word tactics kind of like, not sparingly. Tactics is, yeah, it's for the amateurs, basically. Yeah, and then, of course, yeah, anybody can pick up the field manual and look at it and say, oh, yeah, I read about tactics. I know how to do it. Sure, try to go and, apply it in the practice. I did. It's not easy, believe me. So, here's my talk for you today. And as always, guys, those who like what I do, please subscribe to my channel. And those who can afford, please support me on the Patreon or buy me a coffee, and I really appreciate your support, guys. So, you know what? It's Friday the 13th. Have a nice weekend. And I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.